Well, it's now just after 10 GMT. That's just past midday in Khartoum. And we begin in Sudan, where after just a day of relative calm, fighting has once again resumed across the capital and its neighboring cities. The conflict between the army and the paramilitary force has also reignited ethnic tensions in the Darfur region. More than 1,000 people have now reportedly been killed in West Darfur since the beginning of this conflict. The West Darfur Doctors Syndicate has appealed to the international community to stop the violence. The killings have reportedly been carried out by gunmen, mainly in the city of El Janina. Darfur is often the scene of violence sparked by territorial disputes and access to water between tribes of African origin and Arab tribes. Well, let's go straight to Hiba Morgan. She's across all of this from Omdurman, that's across the Nile River, just from Khartoum. Hiba, the ceasefire ended just a few hours ago, and we're already seeing fighting not only in the capital, but also in West Darfur, where it's been incredibly brutal.
Yes, indeed. Now, Saturday has been very quiet in the capital, Khartoum. But since the early hours of Sunday morning, there has been heavy artillery. There's been airstrikes in various parts of the capital. And there's been gunfire exchange between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army. Now, this ceasefire did not include the western region of Darfur, despite mediators saying it was supposed to be countrywide. West Darfur region, especially Janina, has been the scene of intense fighting, not just between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army, but Arab militias allied to the Rapid Support Forces as well. Let's not forget that Darfur has been where there was intercommunal violence, and there's been ethnic violence and a civil war for a period of 20 years. So people there were already trying to recover from that trauma and from the consequences of that war. But now, with the fighting between the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudanese army, the very few who can make it outside West Darfur into neighboring Chad say that the situation there is catastrophic. They describe villages being burned, bodies on the ground, and that Arab militias are targeting people based on their ethnicities, with the Doctors' Union in West Darfur describing the situation as a genocide and catastrophic due to the ongoing fighting between the Arab allied militias and the Rapid Support Forces and the residents of West Darfur.
Hiba, as you say, civilians have been trying to get across that border. It's been hard to get any concrete information out of Al Janina, given the intensity of the fighting over the last few weeks. You talked a little bit about the situation on the ground there. Is there any help at all?
It's been very hard to get assistance to the western region of Darfur, generally speaking, and Janina in West Darfur has been even harder. Now, the governor of Darfur region declared the entire Darfur region a disaster zone because of the humanitarian consequences of fighting between the Rapid Support Forces, its Arab allied militias, and the Sudanese army there, with civilians caught in the middle. But those who are able to cross the border describe horrific humanitarian situations. Hospitals are out of function, with at least 2,000 renal dialysis patients losing their lives over the past few weeks because of lack of access to health facilities. There are thousands of people who have been injured as a result of the fighting, but those who leave say that their relatives, especially the injured relatives, cannot get humanitarian assistance or medical assistance due to the ongoing fighting. So the situation is quite catastrophic. Doctors saying that there is a huge need for humanitarian assistance, but due to the violence, that is being very hard to deliver to those in West Darfur at the moment.
Hiba Morgan, they're on the ground for us in Omdurman in Sudan. Thank you very much, Hiba. Well, as Hiba just mentioned, thousands of people are trying to flee that violence in West Darfur, and they're escaping into neighboring Chad. Zain Bazravi has more now from Adre, across the border in eastern Chad.
Getting out of Al Janina now is effectively taking your life into your own hands. Those people that are able to escape the besieged city and arrive here at camps like this in Adre, they come here and they wait for help. We've been talking to many of them, and they tell terrifying stories of exactly how arduous it was to get out. One man told us that along the way they encountered militias at checkpoints who beat them, who threatened their lives, and who shot at them as they were running away, and they were split up. The group that was coming was split up, and one man said he's still trying to find his brother.
They beat us and kicked us, and they also whipped us, and they took all my property, my telephone and my bag, and I let them. When we were coming, I lost one of my brothers on the road. When he saw that they were kicking me, he ran away. And they were shooting at him, and he ran into the forest. I've been looking for him all morning. I haven't found him. I don't know if they've killed him or taken him.
the kind of stories we've been hearing from people who've been escaping the violence. It is a harrowing experience for any adult, let alone for the dozens of children that we've seen who are now living in these camps, living out in the open, exposed to the elements. We've seen children showing signs of serious malnutrition. There is a serious problem of access to food and water and hygienic conditions in these sorts of impromptu camps. And one of the most serious problems we've seen is children showing signs of trauma, having seen incidents of violence as they were crossing the border into Adre. But now that they're here, they risk suffering preventable illnesses without the proper medical care if this is how they continue to live for much longer. Zain Basravi, Al Jazeera, Adre, Eastern Chad.
Well, let's bring in Matt Nasheed. He joins us now. He's a political analyst who covers Sudan, and he joins us from Cairo. Matt, we know the fighting is intensifying in Darfur. It obviously has different characteristics to what we've been seeing in Khartoum. There are a host of groups involved. Can you explain for our viewers what's driving it? Who's fighting who?
Sure. Yeah, I think this is what we're seeing right now in West Darfur is a number of Arab militias that are loosely connected and allies historically of the rapid support forces. There's heavily recruitment from their base. Their tribe comprises the senior leadership of the RSF in a lot of cases. And so what we're seeing right now is the consequences of decades of rewarding impunity now taking shape once again in West Darfur. And what I mean by that is that attacks like this, while this is now, I wouldn't say this is unprecedented since 2003, there have been brutal attacks that have been taking place in West Darfur since former authoritarian leader Omar al-Bashir fell in 2019, and there was hopes of democracy in Sudan. But every single time there was brutal assaults on the non-Arab communities there, whether it was over disputed land or water resources, there was no action taken to hold perpetrators accountable. And instead, they continue to be emboldened, often recruited, often armed, and given both, legal immunity and cover by the RSF that feared effectively of antagonizing old tribal allies. So now this is the consequence of it. We're seeing communities that are heavily armed, Arab communities significantly heavily armed, that have no fear whatsoever of repercussions, and that have very close ties and help and aid from one of the main belligerents in this war, which is the Rapid Support Forces.
Let me ask you a little more about that, Matt, because many of these Arab militias are aligned with the RSF, and the RSF was essentially born out of the Janjaweed, which has a very brutal history, as you alluded to there, in the region. Are they receiving arms right now from the RSF?
It's tough. It's difficult to verify, but historically they have. A number of people within these Arab militia gangs, motorcycle bike gangs, driving convoys. A number of them are also fighters within the RSF. Not all, but many of them. And so what we see is that the lines are quite porous. While the RSF in Khartoum, for instance, looks like, even this could be debatable, but looks to be more in comparison to Darfur as a more concrete entity. In Darfur, the lines are so porous between Arab militias that operate under no chain of command from the RSF whatsoever, nor pretend to be, nor put up the facade of doing so, but at the same time having a number of the members within these communities that are also employed and fight along the RSF and with the RSF as well. And so this is what we see, the integration between the dark history of how the RSF came into being and how that history is replaying itself out right now with the original Janjaweed militias in Darfur. The contradiction I would add is that in the past, the Janjaweed was armed and weaponized by the military. Now that we're seeing is that actually these militias are being armed and weaponized and given immunity by the RSF itself, which formed out of them. So there's a bit of an irony there.
Matt, the talks to try to end the conflict in Sudan and Jeddah have been very much centered on Khartoum. Now, given the number of armed groups involved in the Darfur fighting, who do you think should be trying to tackle this?
Well, I think right now what we're seeing is this is partially due to a complete power vacuum that has taken place. And as a result of that, what we're seeing is that militias loosely connected with the RSF taking advantage of that to settle scores and consolidate their control over disputed resources. And that's translating into violence with an ethnic face to it, where they're targeting people based on ethnicity. And so as a result of that, I think some of the solutions need to be revisited from, from 2006, 2007 and onwards. We need to start contemplating about a peacekeeping mission, for instance. And I know that would be incredibly difficult from a technical and legal perspective, but we need to start raising this right now within the highest corridors of power right now, because at the moment there's absolutely no monitoring, and there's no actor right now present in Sudan that has the capability nor political will or intention to try to provide any semblance of security to communities right now in Darfur. So what that means effectively is that those that are most militarized and have the most backing from factions in Khartoum, such as the RSF and their tribal allies, can essentially go on a killing spree with absolutely no repercussion. So there needs to be independent monitoring, and that itself can provide a semblance of protection, because it raises the specter of accountability once perpetrators are identified.
Matt Nasheed there, a political analyst who covers Sudan, speaking to us from Cairo. Thank you for joining us again, Matt. Really great to get your thoughts here again on Al Jazeera.